Hello and welcome back to Deck Doctor. This week we're going to take a look at my very own list. This is a home brew and this is Spiderman Green, a mid-range deck that uses a new Deepwood Stalker. Now this is a friendly neighborhood list. There's a lot of web slinging involved. But basically it plays like a mid-range green deck, but it uses Spirit of Rebirth, which is personally one of my favourite green cards, to power up creatures in your hand when they die, and then it uses stuff like Bone Collector as well to really snowball an early game creature out of control. Now this list does rely on the early and mid game a lot and does fall off towards the late game, but it has a lot of powerful ways of staying in the match during the early game with the small creatures that you play early on, but also the Verdant Forces and the Grove Guardians to pack some, some power towards the end of the mid game. So let's talk about the cards and look at what's in the deck. To kick things off, we have Bone Collector, and this is a great card because it's a turn 1 Faeria Harvester and costs 1 forest, and if you do manage to have some creatures get destroyed around it, it gets powered up, and this is a card that can snowball pretty hard if it isn't checked, so investing power-ups into it like Elderwood Embrace is always great, and getting it powered up from the Spirit of Rebirth gives that a little bit more durability from removal like Flame Burst, and then again if it sticks on board and has creatures die around it, you'll be having a very sturdy creature that can challenge a lot of the mid-range creatures in the game. Grove Guardian was a card I didn't have in the list originally, and I kind of felt like the deck was lacking some power, and what better than a 5 Faeria 5/6, which is kind of the peak of a mid-range stat line in this game. Ancient Howl, Ground Shaker, these cards are at kind of like the 6 Faeria, 5 Faeria peak, so I felt like Grove Guardian, just for its stats alone, was really good, and you're going to be able to develop enough forests to get this guy out pretty early. Verdant Force is the main beater of the deck. He is going to challenge a lot of the bigger creatures that your opponent plays, but he's also just a massive threat. A 7/7 is very powerful, and when you combine that with stuff like Teleport and Voice of Truth to reset its stats, it becomes a big problem for your opponent. So this is a good finisher, but also a good creature to play in the early and the mid game to challenge at the Faeria Wells. Spirit of Rebirth is one of my favourite green cards and saw a lot of play at the start of Early Access. Life Coach originally made this card very good in a control list, but I've decided to use it in a much quicker mid-range list to get power-ups onto the smaller creatures, so they're just a bit more tankier going into the mid-game. And Spirit of Rebirth, of course, with the interaction of Deepwood Spider, extending its power by +1 lets you kill a lot of things like Triton Warriors, Water Elementals. So it's a very good card if it does hit the Deepwood Stalker, but if it doesn't, it's still great to get those extra stats on your creature just to make it more durable. Elderwood Embrace, classic green card, it's the best power-up in the game. Outside of maybe Gift of Steel, but Gift of Steel is very situational in a sense. You have to have combat creatures. Elderwood works anywhere, and this is going to extend the power and the health of your creatures and allow them to stick to the board. Tephra is kind of the big swing card if you get enough Faeria to play it. Play the 6/6 flyer with charge 2 is incredible on its own, but the power up it gives, the +5/+5, can be awesome in certain situations. You can push damage with it, use it on your smaller creatures like the Bone Collectors, like the Spirit of Rebirths, just to make them into kind of monster stat line creatures that can challenge a lot of your opponent's threats. So Tephra is a great card, and I definitely recommend getting this for the deck if you haven't already got it. The Emperor's Command is probably the best card from the 6 new epics that were recently added. This is a 2-cost neutral with 3 utility abilities. Give -2/-1 to a creature, deal 3 damage to a structure, or gain 4 life. Now, -2/-1 allows your creatures to stay on board and take good clears on your opposing creatures, but what's even better about this card is the -1 kills Shaitan Assassins. Now this is a card that Green has had problems with for a very long time. It's a 1/1 with Death Touch and Protection, and you're able to kill it cleanly with the Emperor's Command. Deal 3 damage to a structure is also really good for green because cards like Forbidden Library and Altar of Souls are really difficult for green to deal with, especially if they're played in the early game. It means that green has to develop lands up and then answer it with creatures via teleports or just playing them next to the structures. But now we have a way we can deal with structures from afar using the Emperor's Command. Last but not least, we have the heal. Now, Runa's Presence offers a heal. This offers one less than Runa's Presence, but at the same cost. This will help against burn, and this will help against rush or trying to stay in the game when you're trying to race your opponent. Zagami Grovecaller is just an amazing card in general. It gives green some mobility. You're able to teleport a friendly creature onto a forest and then maybe attack an enemy or move into an aggressive position. Voice of Truth is one of the newer cards green received recently, and one of the reasons why green is kind of back on the map. It gives a way for green to deal with Soul Eaters, Zealous Crusaders, Apex Predators, cards that green have traditionally struggled against in the past. And you can also heal your own creatures with this card. So if you had a Verdant Force, let's say you attack a Ground Shaker, it deals 5 damage to your Verdant Force. Play the Voice of Truth and it'll go back to a 7/7. So just an amazing card with tremendous utility. Feed the Forest is green's economy card. You're able to sacrifice a creature and gain Faeria equal to its health and draw a card. So this not only gives you a burst of Faeria, but it also gives you additional card draw as well. And when you combo that with Living Willow, it's a great way to get additional Faeria to play more threats or just get back into a match. So these two cards combined provide green with a good comeback mechanic. Now, Living Willow is a great card against blue jump. That's why it's in this list. I wanted to make sure this list could at least have a fair chance against all the meta decks. It was originally running Oakland, but Oakland's very weak to transform, and the creatures you power up through Oakland are also weak to transform. So to counter blue, I've added Living Willow, and it's done really well so far. So you could either run Living Willow or Oakland, which I talk about in the changes, but if you've seen a lot of blue jump, I definitely recommend keeping Willow in the deck. Last but definitely not least is the Webhead himself. This is Deepwood Stalker, the new card that has been added to green. It's a free Faeria 2/4 and its gift is fight an enemy creature. So this is basically removal for green in the form of a creature. It has the same kind of effect as Cypher's Wrath and Soul Drain. It deals 2 damage, but instead we gain a creature which has 4 health, so it could survive and start collecting Faeria as well. And combined with cards like Spirit of Rebirth, it can extend its reach even further. This is just an amazing card. You can play this down, kill an opposing creature, and keep it around to collect Faeria. It can help you clear enemies combined with other creatures even if it dies. And if it does die, you can position it in a way that it dies next to your Bone Collector, so your Bone Collector gets powered up. So an absolutely amazing card. And one of the cards has put green back on the map. I said that Voice of Truth had done that. Deepwood Stalker has definitely helped Mono Green become a viable deck again in this metagame. For the mulligan, you're going to want to keep an early Harvester. Bone Collector is probably the best because you can play it on turn 1. As for the other cards, I like to keep Spirit of Rebirth because if you can get it down early and your opponent can't answer it, it can start powering up cards in your hand. Deepwood Stalker is also a good keep because it allows you to clear any opposing Harvesters, and you might be fortunate enough to keep it alive and then it can start harvesting for you as well. Other keeps, I would suggest a Living Willow. Again, a great card that's going to stick to the board and collect Faeria. Elderwood Embrace is also really good because it allows you to power up your creatures to make them more sturdy. Elderwood Embrace on a Bone Collector against red is really good. It becomes a 3/7 and it's going to stick around against some power-ups. Verdant Force is not a bad keep as well, and it's a bit expensive, you know, pay 6 Faeria, but it is a 7/7, so it is going to stay around and it's going to be able to fight for you on the well spots because this deck likes to move into one well and challenge your opponents for those Faeria wells. So Verdant Force, again, not a bad keep, especially if you know your opponent's playing something like red and you can keep that 7/7 on board, maybe even power up for an Elder Embrace, and it's going to become a big problem for them. This deck costs 1095 memory in total, but does have a lot of things you'll probably have picked up on along the way. Verdant Forces, Grove Guardians for example. 17 rares, so pretty cheap on that front. 5 epics, being the new cards, and 1 legendary, and that is Tephra. Now if you don't have access to the Emperor's Command, but you do have access to Runin's Guidance, it's a pretty good replacement. So I wouldn't say that you can make this change until you get the commands, but the commands will definitely help you against a deck like Green Yellow Sacrifice. Another change you can make as well, dropping the Living Willows for the Oaklands. So if you're not seeing a lot of blue jump at your part of the ladder, Oakland's a good replacement because you can get some really powerful creatures from that. But if you power up your Spider, the Deepwood Stalker, it's going to do insane amounts of damage and become a really powerful removal tool. Last but not least is Tephra. So Tephra's a tough one because it's quite a swingy card, and it's gonna, can't really replace this big dragon, 6/6 body, flying and charge 2, but also the power up effect it gives. However, you could try Runin's Presence. Now, if this card does hit Deepwood Stalker, it's going to be massive and going to be a great piece of removal. However, if it hits anything else, like a smaller creature like Tiki Caretaker or a Bone Collector, it could be pretty good as well. But Tephra's pretty hard to replace, but Runin's Presence, or maybe a power-up like Tiki Caretaker, could be a good alternative. Let's talk about the strengths and weaknesses. This deck has a strong early game. You have Bone Collectors, Deepwood Stalker, Spirit of Rebirth, and Verdant Force and Grove Guardian to help you control the wells and eventually bully your opponent off board and apply some damage by teleportation or just by moving these strong creatures up towards your opponent's orb. Deepwood Stalker acts as removal, so you can take care of an early harvester or a creature that's in your way, and if it survives, it gives you an extra 2 power to use on board, but also an additional Faeria harvester. Spirit of Rebirth extends the power of creatures in your hand, so if you can get these guys rolling early, some of your weaker creatures like Sagami Grovecaller or Voice of Truth can actually become pretty powerful creatures. And of course, extending the power of Verdant Force and Grove Guardian is going to be a big deal against specific decks. This deck does lack late game, unfortunately. It doesn't pack Thorian Golems or Oak Fathers to go into the late game. It wants to win early and just before your opponent is able to regain its footing and overwhelm you with powerful creatures. So you want to win pretty early on if you can, but with all these small creatures you're going to be able to overwhelm your opponent pretty quickly. Only 1 from hand power up is kind of a big deal for green. It uses that Elderwood Embrace, but it doesn't pack Runin's Guidance, it doesn't pack the Tiki Caretakers. So that can be a big problem sometimes where you need to clear something that's a little too big and you wish you kind of had that extra power up, but Emperor's Command can help in those situations. This deck does rely heavily on board control, so if you do lose board at some point, it can be hard to come back if you don't have the right cards. Living Willow into feed into something like a Grove Guardian or a Verdant Force is a great way to come back. But if you don't have, say that, for example, once you lose board, you're probably going to lose the game. As for matchups, I feel this deck does pretty well against Crackthorn decks, if they don't get those kind of ridiculous Crackthorn pings. And it does good against red decks as well, especially if the Bone Collector gets out of hand. It can be very hard for red to stop that. And the Verdant Forces as well pack a lot of punch. It does struggle against blue jump and yellow events. Now I don't feel like the matchup is super in their favour, but it's in their favour enough that if they do get board control, you're probably going to lose just because of their mobility and their removal. And Frogify really hurts this deck because if it hits your Verdant Force, that's a 7/7 you can no longer leverage your opponent with. It's going to become a 2/2, which is much easier to clear. But I feel these decks can win the matchup. It's just going to be a little bit of a struggle. Land placement is pretty straightforward. You want to build from the side of your orb towards your first well, and then push forests or neutrals, depending on what you're playing against, up until you get to an aggressive spot, and then push damage with teleportations or by setting up aggressive Verdant Forces or Grove Guardians. You want to fight for 2 wells, one of your own and one of your opponent's, and you want to win that battle on board and eventually use teleportation, like I said, or just overwhelm your opponent with your big bulky cards. And that's about it really. There's not much else you need to know. You can build into the wells if your opponent decides to challenge you. If your opponent builds then the opposite side of you, don't be afraid to accelerate your lands with neutrals first and then get that aggressive forest to apply pressure. That wraps up this episode of Deck Doctor. I hope you enjoyed it. This is a really fun deck. I've been playing it a lot and I really love it because I feel like it gives green that bit of flexibility when building. You don't have to rely on Faeria Golems or Oak Fathers anymore. You can build it a little bit faster, and Deepwood Stalker is definitely a great addition for giving the deck removal. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to our channel and give us a thumbs up. If you have any comments or feedback, by all means let me know in the comments section below. Be sure to check out Faeria.com/the-hub for articles, guides and decks. Until next time guys, take care, have a great day.